Welcome to the Every Breath Counts podcast. My name is Ryan Sheckle, and each week I interview experts and leaders about their stories and strategies on how to optimize your mind, your body, your career, and your life so that you can make every breath count. Thank you for investing your time in the show and yourself. Now let's get started. U.S. figure skater Scott Hamilton said, "Adversity and perseverance and all these things can shape you. They can give you a value and a self-esteem that is priceless." Jay Thooft founded Performance Excellence and Recovery Consulting, a consulting firm dedicated to providing developing athletes the tools necessary to elevate their mental game and perform in the face of stress, pressure, and adversity. We talk about what it takes for athletes to perform at the highest levels and how the same strategies work for college, high school, and youth athletes alike. If you strive to be a high performer, grab a notepad, listen to what Jay has to say, and start implementing these strategies. If you like this episode, share it with a friend that might also enjoy it. And if this is your first time here, welcome and thank you for tuning in. Be sure to click the subscribe button to stay up to date with all the latest episodes, and be sure to leave a rating and a review on iTunes and iPodcasts with the most impactful part of this episode when you're done listening. Get ready to make every breath count. Here is Jay Thooft. Jay, what's up? Thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, man. That's quite the intro. So humbled to be here. Happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
You spent years working at the Olympic training facility in Colorado Springs. What separates an Olympic athlete from a gold medal Olympian?
Not much, if you want me to be 100% honest with you. I think one of the things that, especially when I talk to even my younger athletes that we talk about is as you rise up the chain of sport, whether you start playing in youth and then you move into high school and then now you're into college, maybe you play professionally, or, if your sport, the track is to go to the Olympic Training Center. I'm going to be honest with you. There is very, very little. The margins at that level are so small that, and I don't mean to do a little shameless plug here, but it truly was many times those athletes that put in the extra work on the mental side, the extra work on the recovery side, because the margins are truly, truly just so small. I mean, we're talking milliseconds in time sports. We're talking fractionals of points in, some of the shooting points and things like that. So the short answer to that question is very, very little. And so that raises the second question of, well, how do you kind of separate yourself? And, we spend a lot of time, and even the Olympic Training Center, even those athletes, those national team athletes, they spend a ton of time, just like most athletes do, on the physical side of their sport, on the technical side of their sport, on the tactical side of their sport. And you put hours into those things, right? You put hours training your body, you put hours honing your skills, you put hours into studying the strategy of the game. And then I will often ask, high school, college, even my professional athletes, how much time have you put into the mental side, to the,
Yes.
Controlling focus, handling your emotions, achieving whatever optimal mental state that is for you? And the answer is many times very little. And I think it would surprise most people that there are a lot of national team athletes that will find their way to a training center, such as the one that I was at. They will find their way there just purely based on just, talent given from a higher power or whatever you choose to believe in. They are just incredibly, incredibly athletically gifted. But everybody finds that ceiling. Everybody finds the ceiling for, as far as their, physical, technical, and tactical skills are going to take them. And eventually we have to start making an investment into the mental side of the sport, because the mental side is really there to just get the most out of everything else. It's there so that way, when it comes time, when you're in that high stress, very dynamic environment of sport or of performance, can you get the most out of all that physical training, the technical training, and then the tactical training? Can you put it all together in the face of that stress and pressure and probably adversity that you're going to face? So there's a short answer and then there's a long-winded answer to that.
Yeah, Tim Grover, the trainer for Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant and the likes of many other athletes, just released a book, and he's kind of been doing the press circuit, just
Hmm.
talking about like what it took for these guys to take it to the next level, what the mentality is between like such a dynamic winner, and an
Yeah.
average maybe
Yeah.
NBA athlete. And the crazy thing is, like you said, there isn't much physically that's different, but there
Yeah.
is a ceiling that a lot of guys get to. So what are the things that some of these athletes are doing to break through that ceiling, or what do you teach them
Yeah.
on how to
Yeah.
break through it?
That's a great question. I think we have to look at it from, every single athlete, every single performer, the hallmark quality. And we know this from, interviewing tons of coaches, hundreds of coaches. The number one quality that coaches are looking for is really consistency. Right. And I think that's a
Yes.
really important quality. I don't necessarily always think that it's meant to like break through any sort of ceiling, because at the end of the day, your technical, tactical, and physical training, that's going to fill up this bucket that you have that you can bring into competition. And then the mental side allows you to say, how much of this bucket am I going to bring out? Because let's be honest, across professional sport, there are plenty of athletes that are not the best, not even close to the best at their position. And they have found 10, 12, 15, even longer, 15-year, even longer careers. The name that always comes to mind is Ryan Fitzpatrick of the Miami
Mm-hmm.
Dolphins.
Oh
Never
yeah.
been considered the best. Not in college. Well, it wasn't an elite level prospect coming out of high school. I believe he played at Harvard, right? Not a Power 5 school, not an SEC school. I'm not even sure that he was drafted, to be honest with you. Maybe he was in the later rounds. I'm a little fuzzy on the story. But the point is that he was never considered the best athlete, the elite level athlete at his position. He's still playing. For a league where the average career is about 2.5 to 3.5 years, he's been playing now for 15 years plus, and that comes from the ability to be consistent. So in consistency, whatever, if you're the best player, then you're consistently the best player on the team. If you're a hockey player and you're a second or third line player, then you are consistently a reliable second and third line player. And the reason that's so important is because if you're consistent, your coaches are going to trust you, just point blank. If you're a consistent athlete, your coach trusts you. And if they trust you, that generally leads to more and more opportunities. And that's been basically the story of Ryan Fitzpatrick. When they needed him, they knew that they could trust him. He's rarely ever been the starting quarterback, but they always knew that he could trust him to be the backup. So where does consistency come from? Consistency comes from this ability to mentally and physically consistently get your mind and your body in the best possible place to succeed. And that's where the conversation for me with my athletes always starts, right?
Yeah.
Many times, even if an athlete comes to me with a specific problem, we rarely, unless we have like something major coming up, we will rarely just start there with the thing that they're struggling with, because everybody struggles at something, right? But
Okay.
where we start is reminding them that there is an optimal mental and there's this optimal physical state that can be achieved if we work towards it, if we work to understand that, right? So what does your level of focus look like? How does your mind fire, right? So a mental state is really made up of two things. It's what your mind can do and how your mind feels, right? So how your mind feels is, level of optimism, attitude that you're bringing that day, just overall outlook, mindset. What your mind can do, though, especially for specific sports, is very important. How well and how efficiently does your mind process information? How fast does it need to? How well can you make decisions, right? How well can you move on from mistakes, things like that. So every single athlete or even performer that listens to this episode, they have an optimal mental and an optimal physical state that when they achieve that, they are able to put out consistently high quality performances, or performances that would qualify as being kind of the upper percentile of what they can put out on a daily basis.
Yeah, I love that you brought up Ryan Fitzpatrick, and as a Buffalo Bills fan, he was awesome to have here, and
Yep.
It truly is a great story, right? So he was a Harvard guy, and I don't know if he did get drafted or not, but you're right. He was consistent, and he's like the perennial, like he's the ultimate backup quarterback in the
Yep.
NFL because you know what you're going to get when he
Yep.
comes in. And to an extent, the same is true about like Tom Brady. When he came out of the combine, he didn't have any of the scores that you were looking to have from a high level elite athlete. Now, quarterback, you might not necessarily be thinking, okay, well, you have to have the fastest 40 time or, bench press the most. Although I think like, you get your Baker Mayfield or whoever who can kind of bench a little bit. But it's the consistency of the day in, day out discipline to practice, mental fortitude that really can make the difference, especially in the longevity, of performance. And it's really great that you had mentioned that, but I'm also curious because you said that it's two things. It's what the mind can do. And then I forget the other one you said.
How it feels, how your mind feels.
How it feels.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know your opinion on this. Can you increase what your mind can do? Or is that just something that some athletes have? Or is it honing what it already can do?
Yeah, great question. So the question is, can we increase what our mind can do? And so are you asking in terms of focus, in terms of processing information, in terms of decision making? Or just kind of all the above?
So all the above, because I guess what I'm wondering is a high level athlete comes to you and are they at a certain point where it's like your mind is capable of so much, I need to get you to that potential?
Yeah.
Or are they performing to the highest their mind can perform to? I need to extend that.
Sure. I think it's more often than not trying to allow them to unlock consistently and place more of it in their control. So let's say that what sport did you play, Ryan?
So I played baseball, basketball, volleyball.
Okay. What position did you play in baseball?
I was a pitcher.
You were a pitcher. Excellent. So one could probably safely assume that Ryan as a pitcher, when Ryan was at his best, he had this optimal mental state in terms of how his mind felt and like what his mind was able to do. And he would have moments where that would just happen. You'd show up, today's a good day, we're rolling. Some people call that a flow state. Some people would call that in the zone. I tend to not use that language. I think that, a true flow state and a true getting in the zone is something that happens as a result of other things, not necessarily something that we could shoot for, because the fact of the matter is, if we're just relying on getting to a flow state to be able to perform, many times we're not going to, we don't have the other skills necessary to be resilient when things go wrong. Because there's just going to be days that we're going to struggle. Ryan is a pitcher. There's going to be days where he just cannot find for the life of him that release point. But let's say that there are days when Ryan is just able, man, I just got it. I just got it that day. I tend to refer to that place as the green light, right? Green means go. It's very simple. It's a traffic light metaphor. There's a yellow and there's a red light as well. But it's a very simple idea of if we can keep ourselves as close as we can to the green light, right? And exist not always perfectly in the green light, but as close to that place as possible. And the green light is made up of, as we'll talk about here, a mental state and a physical state. And there's a variety of different factors that go into that. But let's say that you're able to get to this place every so often. I would like to get you there more consistently. I don't necessarily think that it's a matter, and I think that sometimes, I'm gonna back up a little bit, I think that sometimes that does involve the need to actually do some skill building. Okay, so let's say, for example, in that state, you are just so able to immerse yourself in that moment, lock yourself in on that task, and control your focus. And let's just say that, on those days, you're just able to do that, but there's other days where you really struggle with that. So that might point to there's a little bit of a skill deficiency there, in that it's not something that's in your control yet. You have yet to, as a young baseball player, you have yet to truly learn how to manage distractions, discipline your mind, and keep yourself immersed in that present moment. Okay. But that's where we know that we need to get to. We need to get you to that place as often as possible. So then we have to ask ourselves two questions. What skill does Ryan need, right? What do we need? How can we train Ryan to elevate his focus, which is absolutely possible. There's plenty of science to show that. I have plenty of, experience with my athletes to show that we can increase the ability to control one's attention. But then the other side of the question, I think this is the part where people forget, and this is the part where I see, whether it's on social media or just the internet at large, we fall in love with this idea of mental skills training. Ryan has a problem focusing. Let's do a mindfulness exercise. Let's do some breath work or whatever it is. But what if there's something getting in the way of Ryan's ability to focus? Is it an issue of pressure? Is the pressure getting to him? Is he having a hard time managing his emotions? Is there a bit of an imbalance in Ryan's identity in that moment that's creating this level of pressure? What is it, right? What's getting in the way? And that's the part that people forget. Because just as we have a green light, we also have a red light. And the red light is also made up of this specific mental state. And much of that at times can be due to the stress and the pressure and the emotional experience that comes from it. So we have to remove those roadblocks. And that's just one aspect of Ryan's optimal mental state, is this ability to focus.
So how do we even identify those red lights?
Yeah. You take yourself to the place when you really struggle. And this is an incredibly important part of that process of going through this kind of early phase sort of assessment period with an athlete, is that we absolutely define what it looks like for you to be at your best, and have a very structured way of doing that. But then we go to those moments where the wheels fall off the wagon, right? Where the train's off the tracks, we have crashed and it is a big mess. And we go back to those moments and we ask ourselves, what happened mentally? How would we define that mental state? If in the green light, if we're just using the simple concept of focus, if in the green light you're able to manage distractions efficiently and keep your mind anchored in the moment, if what happens then in the red light, where's your mind going? Is it going to the past? Are you a person who tends to get stuck on past mistakes? If so, why? Right? What has happened in your past that maybe makes you more susceptible? Are you somebody who maybe you tend to wander in the future? It's a little bit more common for high level, more type A athletes to be worriers, right? To not handle the uncertainty of sport very well. So now your mind is drifted off into the future, and before you know it, you're behind 3-1 on a guy. Now you got to give him a fastball, and pretty soon, now we start to spiral. So to figure that out is not, we can't just assess the good, because sports psychology and mental performance is not just for these sunshiny days where everything goes right. If that was the case, if athletes could always do that, there would be no use for me. Sports psychology is for the days where things really start to go wrong. Can we understand what's that?
So what really resonates with this is that if you think about anyone that has done physical training without mental training or psychological training in sport, they truly understand the idea that growth, particularly muscle growth, comes on recovery days, right? So you've pushed yourself to a limit, you've identified a pain point to where you now have to surpass, and then you grow through your recovery, through your rest, right? So I'm curious to understand, when you're going through this process and trying to promote growth at a psychological level, are you doing controlled practice to the point where you're pushing someone like over that threshold of where now they aren't focused mentally, and identifying that and then addressing that and finding those growth points on the recovery days? Like, how's that process work?
That's a great way to kind of describe it. I don't think I ever quite used those words or that metaphor, but eventually one of the things that we get to be able to do once we've, kind of this first step of identifying, this optimal mental state, what kind of goes wrong, is there some low hanging fruit that we can shore up, such as a focus exercise, or such as, handling emotions, or maybe we need to talk about confidence. Once we get kind of this, what I would call the foundation, I think, and I define the foundation as somebody's mindset. A mindset's nothing more than the patterned way that we think. It's our thought habits. If your mindset as an athlete is fundamentally flawed, there's For example, if you have a improper, unhealthy relationship with your emotions, that your emotions dictate the actions that you take, there's no amount of mental skills that's going to help that until we fix that mindset. But once we have this mindset kind of established, and that's a little bit of a longer conversation, and then we can start to do some of this work with skills, whether that's visualization or how we talk to ourselves or actualizing confidence. And, the list is endless. One of my favorite exercises, and one of the exercises that the athletes that I work with really enjoy and find a lot of value in, is sort of exactly what you're describing, in that in a controlled environment, we will take them to a place where they struggle. Visualize in this big moment, visualize and be willing to visualize yourself struggling. Once you've identified that, right? Once you've taken yourself to that place in a very controlled environment, right? It's usually just them and myself in my office, or generally now with, today's day and age, via a Zoom session such as this one. Once we've identified that, or once we've taken them to that place where they're going to struggle, now all of a sudden we help them see, this is what it's going to feel like emotionally. This is how your body's going to react physically. What's your plan going to be? Because this could happen. What's your plan going to be? What are you going to pull from either your mindset or from the toolbox that we've established for you? What are you going to utilize in that moment? See yourself using it, and then see yourself overcoming it. And so in a way, yes, there is this sort of pseudo pushing the brain, taxing the mind, and really just making them uncomfortable. But then also showing them that even in the face of that discomfort, we can define a very clear path forward, that you have what's necessary to be able to overcome whatever that stressor is in that situation.
Yeah, it's crazy, because if you think about just performing in athletics in general, I've always thought you never really truly know when you're hitting that point, when you're like engrossed in the activity itself. Like I kind of reflect back to when I was a pitcher, and while I may have been struggling a little bit, falling behind in the count, it's not like I was telling myself like, hey, you're losing focus here.
Right.
It's just that you're not focused. Are there particular strategies that you have that helps athletes or anyone in a stressful situation realize, like self-reflect and say, hold on a minute, right now I am not focused?
Well, let's do this with you right now. In that situation, if you could take your self, I know I'm putting you on the spot, but if you could take yourself back to those moments where you were kind of cruising along, and then things kind of started going sideways, and we would define this as like the yellow light. Again, I love using this traffic light metaphor. You have a green, before there's a red, there's always a yellow, right? Before the wheels fall off, before it's a big mess, there is always a yellow. And the yellow, just like the traffic sign, is the caution sign, right? It says that there's potential trouble ahead. So if you could, for us, identify, what do you feel like from a mental side? What would be like the first little mental shift that you'd be able to recognize if you took yourself back to that place as a pitcher? What would be the first little kind of mental caution sign, or even physical caution sign, or even it could be something that where it was manifesting itself from a situational standpoint, where maybe you'd consistently miss high and away because of something? What do you feel like, either mentally, physically, or situationally, you could identify as maybe, this is kind of the first sign of trouble for me on the mound?
Yeah, it brings me back a long way. Okay, so let's think about that. I guess the first thing that would come to my mind is probably frustration. It's probably like, man, I normally can hit that like low outside corner. I don't know why I'm just. It's almost frustration, confusion.
Yeah.
Like,
and what would that frustration lead to? What would that frustration? So frustration is an emotion. Fantastic. What would that frustration lead to from an action standpoint? Okay. Now
it would normally, so I would say it would normally then immediately turn into a breakdown of form.
Yes.
Right. Like it would be overcompensation or just a form breakdown.
Or you're trying to control your form. So this is a very common thing, especially for young pitchers, and maybe we'll have a pitcher, but this would be exactly the process. Okay. So you get frustrated. Okay. In a big part of this too is, you brought up the point that it's so hard for athletes to recognize when this is happening. Absolutely. And a big part of this kind of throughout the work that I do with athletes is just really raising their awareness to it. It's like kind of we're building this little satellite radar for each athlete to be able to detect when some of this stuff is happening. But for you, if you were a client of mine, that would absolutely be something that we would need to raise some awareness around, is that, okay, A, can we detect the frustration? If not, if we can't detect the frustration right away, how is the frustration manifesting itself in your performance? And for you, not unlike many pitchers, and you even see this with big league pitchers, and you can see it when they start doing it. They start to over control a movement that should be automatic. I start to aim instead of throw because I need to hit that outside corner because I'm frustrated. And now we're starting to place control on a movement that should be relatively automatic, that we've done plenty of times. And I'm no longer focusing on my form. I'm focusing on over controlling a movement, right? I'm not focusing on technique anymore. So that would be a telltale sign. So then the challenge becomes, can we catch that earlier? Can we catch either that frustration, or can we catch when you start to control that? Can we develop a strategy for you, which we absolutely could, to self-correct, course correct, because that would be your yellow light. If that continued, maybe we started walking some guys, and then we get frustrated, we leave one over the plate, and now they've got a 2-run double, whatever it is. Now we're in the red, and now we're really emotional now, and it's really hard for even athletes at the highest level to pull themselves out of this red light. Any athlete or performer has been here before. I've been here, you've been here. It is rough. So generally, we would like to avoid the red. And that's where the work in the yellow comes in. Can we recognize and identify some of these warning signs before we're in a place that's just such a hole that we probably need to step away to be able to recover from? But that would be a great example for you as a pitcher about how that process would work.
Yeah, you see it so often. And it's crazy because you don't just see it in sports, right? Like you see it in just anyone going through life at work, right? And that's kind of where a lot of this, I love the analogy of sport to performance in the workplace, because so much of what you're saying translates to the business arena. And you may have these yellow lights where you're at work, you're getting frustrated. You can sense yourself, and I'll be honest with you, I can sense myself getting frustrated at work a lot more than I can when I'm on the sports field.
Yeah.
Because I think when you're on the field, you're already anticipating there being some sort of like heightened awareness or increase in blood pressure, increase in pulse rate. And it's not something that's like, oh, hey, my pulse is high, I must be getting frustrated. But if you're at work and you start sweating and your pulse increases, well, that's a pretty identifiable thing to happen. And maybe you could address it a little bit faster. Yes. But it's crazy to think about just the minuscule differences in how your performance can be affected by just a small shift in mindset. So I'm curious to know, you had this great opportunity working with these Olympic athletes. I mean, how did you realize that this is a very translatable skill or mindset or shift to also apply to college, high school, and youth athletes?
It was one client in particular, and I'm glad you brought it up to address the point on this applying to the business world and this applying to everybody. It's been interesting. I was at the Olympic Training Center for a couple of years, and then I've been doing this for, been with in my company for 5 years now. So for about 7 years, the vast majority of that has been elite athletes and performers. And when I say performers, I'm generally talking about the arts, right? So musicians, actors, things like that. Dancers, that's another big one. But it's interesting, these last couple of years, I've actually had more what I would call, I kind of coined the term corporate athletes. But really, they're just executives. They're people in leadership positions. They're people, or they're salespeople, or people in high stakes positions. The business world, as much as we like to romanticize the ruggedness of the sport and performance domain, the business world can be very rugged as well, right? The business world can be wrought with stress and pressure. And so that's been an interesting piece of work too, and it's actually been some work that I've really, really enjoyed, to be able to translate some of these conversations to just different domains. Like I've had some corporate executives, I've had some high stakes salespeople, I've had some business owners who just want to learn how to be a better leader and connect with those people. And those are all concepts that have been rooted for a long time in high performance and sports psychology. So yeah, when you think about it, the thing that I always tell, even parents, is when I work with one of their younger athletes, is that, listen, that right now they're having a hard time with stress and pressure and adversity. And right now that's manifesting itself in their sport. Stress, pressure, and adversity are not just isolated to sport and performance, and if we go back to what a mindset is, a habitual way of the way that we think, it's very important that we make sure that we build those strong habits. And so that brings me to your question about the Olympic Training Center. How did I know that I wanted to take a step back? And it was truly one client. It was actually not even a U.S. national team client. It was a figure skater, a young lady figure skater from another country. And she was so the story goes, and I can't name the country because that would kind of give it away. But the story goes is that, she was incredibly talented, was flying up through the ranks of her country. Her country did not have a kind of a deep pipeline at all from a figure skating talent standpoint. And she was real good. She was really good. I mean, by the time she was 13 years old, she was considered, like level 10 or the highest level, the ones that you would see on TV. Yeah. And she was incredibly physically gifted, technically just sound, tactically understood, what she needed to do. But then it came time for the big moment. It came time for, the performance on the big stage when the bright lights came on, and it was, for lack of a better word, it wasn't pretty. She really had a hard time. It was to a point where she was breaking down and wouldn't even take the ice because she would have such a physiological reaction to that amount of pressure. Right. And this is a bigger conversation on pressure that I'm not sure we'll get to in this conversation. But it was at that moment that I kind of had this realization of, and I even saw it with some of the athletes that, I would have one-on-one sessions with in the psychophysiology department, which is just neurofeedback training at the Olympic Training Center, is you would just blow you away how many of these athletes have gotten to this point just based on sheer talent, just physical gifts, technical gifts. Many of them had very little mental training until they got to this national team level where we had, I was able to work with some of the best sports psychologists in the world. These are just the heaviest hitters in my field. But they wouldn't have it. They wouldn't have any sort of training, any sort of experience. And I'm like, well, this is why everything that we're doing here is retroactive. Everything that we're doing here is solving problems.
Yes.
What if there was a way to get in with a younger population, with developing athletes, older middle schoolers, right? So 7th and 8th graders, but really, high schoolers, and even as they go into college age athletes, or for if you're hockey, junior hockey players, can we start to build these skills? Can we start to have these conversations earlier? So that way, maybe they don't have to, there's this notion of like, you kind of got to fall on your face before you learn that it's important. And I'm just not a believer of that. I'm not a believer that somebody needs to choke or fail in a big moment before they finally realize, oh, I should have been doing some of that mental stuff. So that led me to starting PERC, which is just an acronym for Performance Excellence and Recovery Consulting. So the main idea behind that was performance excellence, which is the mental performance piece, the ability to handle stress, pressure, and adversity and bring about your best performance in the moments that matter to you. And the recovery piece was I have done some quite a bit of work with athletes coming back from injury, and that's a whole nother kind of separate domain of athletes overcoming the mental side of injury recovery, that sort of thing. But that's what led me to starting PERC, is this idea of there's a real demand here. And at the time, this was back in 2016. So we were not as far as we were in terms of, the mental health world and the stigma around psychology. So it was definitely an uphill battle. But out here in Denver, met with enough sport organizational directors and apparently pitched it the right way that I was able to, build a sustainable, thriving practice. to today, and I love the work that I do. But that was the purpose behind it, is that why in the world are we not having these conversations with younger people before they get to those big moments?
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And if you really reflect on, so much has been written about, let's call it the 10,000 hour rule,
Yeah.
Malcolm Gladwell's whole
Yeah.
thing, right? But at the core of that, whether it's true or not, the core of that is that muscle memory comes from
Hmm.
repetition, right?
Hmm.
So if you're looking at youth athletes, the reason that the Olympians are so good, the reason that the pro athletes are so good in their given field is
Mm.
because they've dedicated so much time,
Hmm.
10,000 plus hours to their craft.
Yep.
And when you dedicate that much time to something physical, like you were saying to me, I may not think about form. I've thrown a lot of
Right.
pitches. I
Right.
may not think about form at all. All I'm thinking is throw the pitch. If I start to then think about the form or the technique that I'm
Hmm.
using, there's probably something wrong, because through the hours of repetition, that has been memorized by my muscles.
Hmm.
Well, if we don't have this training for young athletes, developing athletes that aren't focusing on their mindset right now, then you're right. It's something that's going to be lacking in the future. But giving them that foundation, especially our Olympians that are going to be competing against other countries,
Hmm.
providing that foundation now is, would it then become like brain muscle memory in the future?
I think just like any training, it would be something that, maybe by the time, if you started, like me with a lot of work that I do with high schoolers, is maybe even if in high school, if your average high schooler, and I know this because I ask them every single group that I go into, who thinks the mental side of sport's important, every hand goes up. Who's done anything around it, every hand goes down,
It
right?
goes
So
down.
so
Yeah.
I think it's, I think absolutely. I think any sort of training, any sort of thing, that you do more and more is going to become automatic. I think the real pitch to some of these athletes is, think about, sports only getting more and more competitive, for better or for worse, and it's wrought with all the issues that come with the level of competition becoming more competitive at lower levels of sport. Even, I work a lot of the work that I've done out here is with, tier one youth hockey players. So these are all hockey
Yeah.
players that they play 60 some odd games a year. By the time they're done with their 18U, they're going to go play juniors, either in the USHL, which is the highest junior hockey league in this country, or they'll go play for a couple leagues in Canada. And then eventually they'll get drafted, or they'll probably go play Division 1 or Division 3 hockey for a couple of years and then get drafted. These kids are good. My conversation with them is, look around you. How much better are you than the guy next to you? Now, even for some of the best players, like, how much better physically, technically, tactically are you
Yeah.
truly than the guys around you in this room?
Yeah.
And the margins are slim. Now, there's always a few guys that just like stand out, but how much are they going to stand out if they're 16 now and they're 18 when they go to juniors, that sort of thing? So my question to these guys is, where are you going to get your edge? Right? If this is truly about, and this is, I was a former athlete, you were a former athlete. This is truly something that you have to consider, is you're putting all this time training your body, right? All the strength and conditioning, for hockey players, all the ice time for baseball players, all the time on the field, repetitions on the mound if you're a baseball player. You're spending all this time learning the game, yada, yada, yada. But where are you going to get your edge in those moments that matter? Because you go to a tryout and there's 50 other U's there. How are you? And so there's an element
Yeah.
of where are you going to get your edge. There's also an element of, if you put in the work, just like with anything else, you're going to feel like you have an edge, and that's going to manifest itself in competition. Oh, excuse me, in competition as well. It's interesting. You bring up like professional athletes, and yeah, professional athletes and guys that make it in the league for a little while, they're able, they've put tens of thousands of hours into it, but we still see field goal kickers missing kicks. We still see wide
Oh yeah.
receivers dropping balls in the end zone, right? We still see big league pitchers losing it, losing control, right? And
Yeah.
so,
I'm offended that you had to bring up a field goal kicker missing kicks, knowing that I was a Bills fan.
I'm a Vikings fan, man. Nobody has more field goal kicking PTSD than a Vikings fan. That I can assure
Oh
you.
man, I don't know. Wide right with Norwood has got to be up there. From a psychological perspective, though,
Yeah.
in terms of sport, what would you say is more important? And I struggle with this, just understanding, like, what could be more important. Do you think it could be the fear of failure or the drive to succeed?
What is more important? Define important as like impactful.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So what?
Well,
Can
you
be
hear
more,
you hear people say, like, oh well, I'm not driven to win. I'm afraid to fail, or I don't care about
Yeah.
failing. I'm gonna succeed at all costs. Like, what from a
Okay.
psychological
Yeah.
perspective, what do you
So
feel
I
is more
think,
impactful?
man, that's a good question, and this is going to be a little bit of an in-depth answer. But to that person that says, it's kind of that person that says, I hate losing more than I like winning. Right.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. And I think with failure, it's a little bit different because just because you lose, and every athlete that loses doesn't see that as a failure, right? They just, I lost that day. And that's a little bit of a mindset piece, that sort of thing. But to the athletes that are afraid of failure more than they love winning, if I had to put a percentage on it, I would say at least 85% of those athletes have a little bit, if not a lot bit, of an imbalance of their identity that's manifesting itself in pressure. When I hear an athlete say, I'm afraid of failure more than I love winning, generally that can only mean, in my opinion, and from what I've seen these last 7 years, that failure to the athlete means an attack on their identity. And an identity is how we cultivate, is an identity, or our identity, your identity, Ryan, is effectively made up of how you find value of yourself in the world, as well as how you perceive that the world values you. Now, obviously, athletes and high-level performers, sport has become a massive part of who they are.
Yes.
But there's always a point where it can become too much of who you are, because once it becomes too much of who you are, and this is kind of referencing a big study that we did on pressure that I did before I even graduated. Identity becoming, or your sport becoming such a big part of your identity, is only going to create more pressure, because let's say young baseball player, pitcher, he's on the mound and he says to me, I'm afraid of failure. I'm afraid of failure more than I like to win. I'm going to ask him, well, what are the consequences of failure? Or some aspect of, like, what are the consequences of failure to you? Is the consequences of failure that you're going to think less of yourself, that dad might think less of you, mom might think less of you, that you're going to let your coach down, that your teammates aren't going to see you as this great baseball pitcher anymore? Because that's A, not healthy, and B, while there's going to be some people that listen to this and be like, yeah, but that's what makes athletes great. That's what's made some athletes great. We hear about the athletes that become so immersed or so wrapped up in their sport, and we see the success that they have, but we don't see other things. We don't see the impact of the pressure. We don't see the impact personally of the imbalance. So yes, making something so much, or making what you do so much of who you are, can absolutely get you a long ways, but there's a cap, and there's also some sacrifices that you're going to be making in order to do that. So my challenge would be, to that person, is we probably have to have to anybody that says that to me, we probably have to have a conversation about some aspect of how much of your worth, or how much of your perception of the people around you finding value in you, is tied to you playing truly what is effectively a game. So to circle back to the question, what's more impactful? I think that absolutely fear of failure can be more impactful, but I don't think it's always for the reasons that people think. I think people see it as like, that's a huge motivating, driving factor, and it certainly can be, but that's a rocket that burns out pretty quick, and that's a story that we've seen time and time again.
That makes so much sense. So what can parents do to build a strong psychological foundation for their children?
Oh, I love this. That's a great question, because a big part of obviously the work that I do with young athletes is doing work with their parents. A few things come to mind. The piece on identity is you have to make sure, that there is time for the young athlete to be away from the sport. I can't tell you the number of times that,
Yes.
I mean, I had a consult a couple months ago. I'll tell you the story here. The consult a couple months ago, dad comes to me telling me how his son had a great 12U baseball season, and how now all of a sudden all these coaches and all these instructors were telling him this kid's got D1 potential, Division I baseball potential. And the dad's like, so we started playing on 2 or 3 travel teams at one time. We got him lessons. And what do you think happened when he's playing on 3 different travel teams? He got hurt. He just flat out got hurt. He didn't even hurt his arm. He fouled the ball off his foot, right? But that little injury kept him away from it. And now all of a sudden there's this rush to get back. There's this rush. He's 12. He's 12. He has one great 12U season, and all of a sudden this dad thinks that he's going Division I. Now maybe he will, but for the record, you don't know if he's going to go Division I as a baseball player. Yeah. So that's the first piece there, is from an identity standpoint, is they also need to make sure that they're developing themselves as people as well, finding balance in their life as people, because it's just so easy for a young athlete to have his entire social support system, everybody who he feels cares about him, be connected with baseball. To that point too, from that story, I think the second big lesson is develop athleticism, not sports skills.
Love that.
This is a massive, and this even goes mentally, but this whole rush and need to specialize in one sport at such a young age. And by young, I'm talking like middle school or younger, where kids are just playing one sport. Now there's a caveat to this. Obviously, in the sports of figure skating and gymnastics, this is different, but let's also use our heads here. Those sports, you exit those sports a lot earlier too. So while yes, you start at 5, 6, 7, you're also done by the time you're 18, 19, 20. If you go to college, right? If you start a youth baseball player, he can play that sport until he's 40, right? Realistically. So I see a lot of parents getting caught up in son's really good at baseball. He's 12. So what you have here is, you don't have a great baseball player. You have a great little athlete. Let him be an athlete.
Yes.
And we see this intuitively with athletes, even at the highest level. I was a Twins fan. My favorite guy growing up was Joe Mauer. He played 3 sports in high school. Mike Trout played multiple sports. So stop with the need to just specialize so young, and allow them and just focus on developing athleticism. And I think, unfortunately, I did a video on my YouTube channel about, where a lot of this motivation comes from. And it's money. Why would a coach tell a dad with a 12-year-old that, hey, you've got, this kid's going to go Division I? Well, he's trying to move more lessons. Let's be honest about what's going on here. He doesn't have the best interest of the kid at heart, because if he did, he wouldn't be having him play year round. So, make sure that we do things to balance out identity. And that can even making sure that you can find value in them in things outside of sport, right? Find value in them in the other roles that they play in their life. Develop athleticism, not sports skills. One that comes to mind is, especially for young athletes that are really serious about, developing athletically, and they want to play at a higher level of sport. They need to learn how to communicate with people in positions of authority over them, specifically their coach. And this is one especially that
important.
I've seen a ton with my young figure skaters who are predominantly female, my young gymnasts who are predominantly female. It is incredibly important with not just a young athlete, but I would dare to say, especially a young female athlete, to teach them how to have a conversation about what they need and what their expectations are with a person in a position, male or female, of authority over them, specifically their coach. I see this so much with parents who there's an issue with the coach, and the parent, obviously the defense mechanism, the parental, nature kicks in, and you want to protect the child. So they take them to the meeting, and the parent just does all the talking. Okay. The child needs to learn how to have a conversation with that person who has that position of authority over them, because that's not just a skill that's going to be incredibly impactful for their life now, but that's also one that's going to have pay massive dividends down the road, because this is not going to be the last coach that they have. Certainly won't be, there's going to be a tough professor. There's going to be a pain in the butt boss that they've got to deal with, that they've got to learn how to deal with. So that skill is profoundly, profoundly important. So if I was to say like the big three, those would be the big three: balance, identity, make sure that they're developing athletically, not sports skills. And then the other big one is, this is a real opportunity for them, not just to learn how to work with their peers towards a common goal, but also learning how to deal with somebody who's holding this perceived position of power over them.
Yeah, this is so crucial for the development of these kids, and it's something that we've neglected for a long time. And I love that you're doing this, because it truly is. And the more we've talked, I've really gained an appreciation for the fact that this is a true service that's going to make these kids better in the long run, not just performing at the athletic level, but just in their lives in general. So thank you for dedicating your career and your life to bringing up the youth of today to be the adults of tomorrow, and hopefully, just be better people and better citizens kind of as they grow. So a couple last questions before you have to go here. What's the most influential book you've ever read?
Chop Wood, Carry Water. And I'm blanking on the author, but it's a fantastic book. It's probably a 90-minute read, talking about, it's essentially this guy who goes and lives kind of with this more of a monk / kind of martial artist culture, and he wants to learn the way, yada, yada, yada. And the dude, it's a Miyagi Karate Kid process over results type thing. It's just, one of the things that you can take away from high level athletes, especially Olympic athletes, is, they spend 4 years of their life trying to get better. They spend 4 years of their life chopping wood, carrying water, and for no real guarantee of success, and for really only one moment every 4 years to be able to try and do something great. So that book is just tremendous in terms of understanding, getting yourself to buy into the process, right? That pays off in business, that pays off in life. It's just, every day you got to wake up, you got to chop the wood, you got to carry the water, and let the chips fall where they may.
I don't think anyone has ever answered that question faster. I will.
Oh, I love that. I'm a huge reader. Always have been. I'm a huge reader. Always have been. That's my favorite one. Another one would be Mastery by Leonard. Okay. I believe it's George Leonard. That's another great one. But yeah, Chop Wood, Carry Water, 90-minute read. Well worth it.
Nice. So if you could sit down for a drink with anyone in the world, past or present, who would it be? What would you drink and why?
Oh, man. Who would it be? That is a great question. See, this one I'm not answering quite as quick. Personally, completely selfishly, Michael Gervais. He's the current sports psychologist. He was with Red Bull, was with the Seattle Seahawks. Now he's kind of off doing his own thing. That would be a dude's mind that I would love to pick, because he was probably one of the first ones to bring mindfulness and bring kind of being able to anchor and center yourself into your sport. So it would be him. I'd be sipping on some sort of whiskey, probably a nice one. And then what was the third question?
Oh, why? But you answered that. Yeah, so you're not bringing Monster to that happy hour?
No, not bringing Monster to that one. So
all right, and you write an autobiography. What would the subtitle be?
Yeah, I've thought about this. It would be something to the effect of blue collar mindset, something like that. And it would be this idea of everything that I've learned. So the quick nugget is, I'm originally from South Dakota, come from 2 large farm families, and I see a lot of the psychology of high performance and what I see like in a lot of that mindset that I was raised like growing up. So I think there's an element of kind of this just blue collar mindset, grind it out, right? Keep, chopping the wood, carrying the water, that sort of thing. But it'd be some sort of blue collar mindset applied to everybody, that sort of thing. So, yeah.
I love it. Jay Thooft, This was awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time. And look, thanks for doing what you're doing with, the kids that are going to be the future of our country, from here on out. I love what you're doing. I think it's really important. Keep it up. We'll keep in touch, and thanks so much, man.
Yeah,
Make every breath count.
I appreciate it. If anybody wants to know more, we got some free resources over at my website, Train with Perk. Perk is PERC, so trainwithperk.com. If you want to do /free guide, that'll take you right there to that free guide. But if there's a parent, coach, or even performer listening and they want, it's like a 10-minute read, probably my 3 favorite things to help somebody boost their ability to mentally prepare, would highly encourage that. But yeah, man, thanks for the time. Really enjoyed the conversation, really enjoyed the opportunity. Excited to hear the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And all those will be in the show notes for anyone that's listening. So, Jay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great job, man. That was great.
Really appreciate it. Yeah, that was fun.